Iran has admitted its military shot down a Ukrainian passenger jet by accident, killing all 176 people on board. The plane crashed shortly after takeoff from Tehran on Wednesday, after Iran fired missiles targeting US forces based in Iraq. Western countries have been piling pressure on Iran, which has spent days denying that it was responsible for that crash. Well, let's go live now to Asad Beg, who's in Tehran for us. Asad, this admission, as we're reporting, comes after days of denial. So what's precipitated this now?
Well, we've just heard from the General Staff who's reported on state media. Now, he said that the armed forces air defense system shut the plane down. He said that it was a mistake. They're saying it's a mistake, and it was the air unit that mistook the plane. It was at a sensitive time where the armed forces were at heightened alert, and it said it was a human error. Didn't happen on purpose. They offered their condolences to the families of the victims and has asked the Revolutionary Guard to explain what happened to the public on state TV. Now, this comes after days of denial. We had the chief of the Civil Aviation Authority yesterday saying that it was scientifically impossible and illogical that a missile struck the aeroplane. We had further denials later on when he addressed journalists, saying that it was impossible, that he could guarantee that it wasn't shot down by a missile. But we did have countries coming out. We had the United States, we had Canada and others saying that they had evidence or intelligence suggesting that it had been shot down by a missile. We also had a video turn up in the New York Times that showed a projectile going up and striking an aircraft and the aircraft catching fire. We had other video footage of the airplane hitting the ground on fire. So the Iranians have a lot of explaining to do to the public. They've at least accepted that it was a missile, but it comes after days and days of denial. The chief of the aviation authority here had said that there was complete cooperation between civil and military sectors. So people will want to know what happened, how it happened, why was it that Iran denied it? And also the main question is that this took place just hours after Iran fired missiles at US bases in Iraq. Why was the airspace over Iran, over Tehran, not closed down? Why were flights not grounded?
Asad, I mean, obviously heightened tensions in the region. What kind of fallout, after all these days of denials, now this admission, what kind of fallout could we see from this, both at home and abroad?
Well, at home, Iran has been experiencing more support after the assassination of Qasem Soleimani. We saw hundreds of thousands of people out on the streets. Now, this could change that because it's the 1988 Iranian air disaster where the US Navy shot down an Iranian air flight is still fresh in the memory of people here. President Rouhani used it against Donald Trump after Donald Trump said they would target 52 sites in Iran, including cultural sites, if Iran responded to the United States. President Rouhani said, how about the Iranian airline that was shot down, and mentioned the 290 victims of that. So that's still fresh in the memory of Iranians. Internationally, well, it just doesn't look good for Iran. They denied it. They spent the last few days saying that it definitely wasn't a missile, even though the countries were saying that they had intelligence. And this looks like the Iranian militaries has put their hands up and said, yes, we made a mistake. It was human error. We're sorry. And now they're going to have to explain themselves to the Iranian public.
Well, presumably they're also going to have to face some consequences. This was a passenger jet here. So, Asad, what kinds of consequences could they face?
Well, there's obviously the compensation that has to be paid to the victims, but also internationally, I think they will have a lot of questions to answer. So Iran will try to defend themselves. I think they will say that this came at heightened tensions. They were expecting a response, a retaliatory action from the United States. There had been reports that military aircraft had taken off from the base in Diego Garcia and others, other aircraft had taken off in the United Arab Emirates. So Iran will say that the armed forces were on high alert and this was just a mistake. But I think regionally and internationally, there will be some tough questions towards Iran, especially since they spent so many days denying it.
Asad Beg there for us in Tehran, who will continue watching this for us very closely. Thank you, Asad. Well, even before that announcement from Iran, Canada's government had been pressing for its crash investigators to be allowed in.
We repeat our call for a full and thorough investigation. We have a team of officials from Global Affairs Canada and the Transportation Safety Board in place in Ankara, in Turkey. To date, the Iranians have issued 2 visas, and we expect the other visas will be granted soon so we can begin providing consular services, help with the identification of the victims, and obviously participate in the investigation.
Rob Reynolds is live for us in Washington, D.C. Well, as we were just hearing there, the Canadians have been fairly vocal, given the number of their citizens on board this plane. So does this admission mean that they're likely to be given more of the access that they've been pushing for, Rob?
Well, of course, that will depend upon the Iranians, but I will say that the admission from Tehran now that their military did shoot down the Ukrainian airliner and saying it was a mistake does track very closely with what U.S. officials have been saying, with what Ukrainian officials and Canadian officials have been saying somewhat less explicitly, that this was an act by the Iranians. And as President Trump said several days ago, it looks like somebody made a mistake. So certainly this will not be something that the Iranians will be have obviously not been anxious to admit. As we just heard, they denied it for a number of days. They reportedly rearranged the site of the crash in such a way so as to make a true forensic investigation much more difficult, if not impossible. And so this is something that certainly the Iranians will come under great pressure now to cooperate, perhaps even with international inspectors. But I would expect that the Iranians will not allow the U.S. aviation safety experts or the people from Boeing, the company that manufactured the aircraft, to come in, because that would simply run in the face of longstanding Iranian policy.
I know, Rod, that this admission has just happened, but are we hearing any kind of reaction at the moment in Washington, D.C. yet? And I mean, what kinds of consequences could Tehran face?
We have not yet heard any reaction. I'm sure that the consequences will certainly be in terms of public opinion, in terms of the U.S. administration and lawmakers denouncing Iran for attempting to cover this up. As they said, a mistake that they denied for days and then now have finally admitted. But this comes in on the heels of a day of significant developments. The U.S. government, Secretary of State and Secretary of Treasury announced today more sanctions on Iran aimed at its metallurgical industries, its textile industries, as well as a number of individuals who will come under sanctions. This as a result or as a retaliation for the Iranian attacks on 2 bases in Iraq, American and Iraqi military bases. And it also comes as the Iraqis themselves, following on from the assassination of General Qasem Soleimani, have requested that the United States form a delegation to come to Baghdad to speak with officials there about the planning for an orderly and safe withdrawal of U.S. troops from that country. The U.S. Still insists that its troops are not leaving Iraq anytime soon. And I will mention one other thing that is hanging over Washington here is the whole justification for the Soleimani assassination, which the president and his top officials have said was to thwart an imminent threat terrorist attacks against U.S. targets. The president, some time ago, just a day or so ago, saying that it was specifically aimed at thwarting attacks on U.S. embassies. Well, that is a story that has not been told to U.S. lawmakers when they were briefed in secret. And lawmakers are saying, why is this coming out now? We never heard anything about embassies in our classified briefings. And they are saying that the evidence for this alleged terrorist plot, imminent danger to Americans, is very thin. So we'll see a lot more of that, I think, not only here, but we'll see that on the campaign trail as well.
Well, there's obviously lots of different things coming out right now. And as you were just discussing there, Rob, there were escalating fears of a military conflict potentially in the region. And then it felt like that de-escalated somewhat. Could this admission now start that escalation process again?
I think that President Trump has kind of indicated pretty clearly that he doesn't want this to go much further. He even called the downing of the Ukrainian airliner a mistake. If we look at past examples of things like this happening, I can think of the U.S. or the Korean airliner that was shot down by Soviet MiG fighters way back in the Reagan administration. For those with long memories, there was no immediate retaliation. Of course, that's a different situation between the Soviet Union and Iran. But I would expect that maybe retaliation, if there is any, would come perhaps in the sphere of civil aviation. But as I said before, we haven't gotten any response from our inquiries to various government agencies. So we'll just have to see how things happen, how things unfold over the next couple of days.
And we will continue watching that. Rob Reynolds there for us in Washington, D.C. Thank you, Rob. Well, let's dig into this a little more. Joining us by phone from Albuquerque in the U.S. state of New Mexico is Alan Diehl. He's a former National Transportation Safety Board and United States Air Force investigator. Alan, let me start by asking about this admission that it was human error. How does one bring down a passenger jet of this size with human error?
Well, of course, if they're talking about that it was shot down and the shoot down was caused by human error, that would suggest that something is going on, perhaps in the missile battery or the command and control system. Incidentally, I investigated the worst fratricide over Iraq. It was a U.S. Air Force, 2 Air Force fighter planes shot down 2 U.S. Army Black Hawk helicopters. So we see these sort of accidents occurred. Your previous guest mentioned the Korean.
I believe we have lost Alan Diehl. We'll be trying to get him back to